Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll continue reading In Miserable Slavery, the Thomas Thistlewood Diaries, His Peradventures in Jamaica. We're on chapter 4, but before we move ahead, I want to recant something that I said last week about why so many plantations were named Egypt. So many plantations were actually named Egypt, not because Egypt was the only thing they knew, but Egypt was in reference to a biblical story, the land of abundance, the land of plenty, the land of fruitful soil. So they were trying to they named things based on their hopes and expectations of the land. So they had this expectation that if they called the thing paradise, that's what it would be. If they called it Egypt, that's what it would be like. So that was their hope and expectation. I hope that clears things up. Introduction, Chapter 4, Notes on Plantation Life, 1755 to 1759. In the Jamaican Slave Society, the sugar plantocracy were supreme. They were white, they were wealthy, and they were the better educated in the formal sense, since they could afford a schooling in England. Moreover, they controlled the island legislature since they had the property qualifications to support them either as voters or as candidates for election. And free persons of color, however wealthy, were legally barred from both those categories. The slaves, of course, as the property of others, had no rights at all except those allowed by their masters. And it was in the planter controlled legislature which enacted the slave laws, which purported to protect the slaves against abuse. In such a society, obviously, the behavior of the masters was largely ungoverned, except by general consensus of opinion of what might be done without incurring the disapproval of one's peers, and by the state of mind of the individual at the given moment. So they did not regulate themselves in this environment. Through these years of his diary, Thistlewood records excesses of behavior beyond anything previously described, and indeed, he is himself guilty of the worst. We do not know if he was following the examples of others or simply displaying a personal sadistic disregard for the feelings and sensibilities of fellow humans. Perhaps he later felt remorse. Perhaps he was admonished by his employer or his peers, or even by Phoeba, herself a slave, with whom he was now closely and obviously affectionately joined. For whatever reason, he was to exercise a greater control over his behavior in the future. It is, in a sense, remarkable that in these same years he displayed to the full the warmth of his relationship with Phoeba and his apparently friendly attitude toward many slaves under his management. Apparently, because he does not tell us, and we have no certain means of knowing what the slaves thought about him and how they reacted to his apparent friendly concern. The diaries for this period bring much else of interest to our notice. We read of food scarcity in the area, of rice planting in the Egypt morass, precursor to the enterprise of the later 20th century, of slave plays and other ceremonial rites, of fights and quarrels often over sexual relationships among the slaves themselves, and of the apprehensions following the outbreak of the 7 Years' War, which lasted from 1756 until 1763 between England and France, with Spain as a late entrant ally. And there were more particular events, such as the surprise with which the slave woman, Doll, recognized the newly acquired man, Achilles. The arrival, but by no means the first, of a large box of books for Thistlewood, who would lend out several to his friends, and his observations of a now famous comet. But these and other happenings would soon be overshadowed, for in the north central parish of St. Mary, a leadership of slave resistance was in the making. Saturday, January 4th, 1755. In the forenoon, myself, William Cruikshank, Ambo, and Daniel walked through our sand-ground plantain walk westward to a large sand ground, and came to a piece clearly lately, now in corn and cassava. In going, we saw a logwood fence Daniel says he planted, runs nearly northwest and southeast. Returned through the marooned grounds by where Sarah Ward lives. Eat some breakfast of buttered toasted cheese and roast plantain. With her, Homer Jackson come here. We got home about noon. And that night, come Fibber. At night, Fibber slept in the hammock in the hall, would not come to bed. She was rather too saucy. On the 28th of January, Thistlewood put the mill in the commencement of the year's crop taking. Thursday, January 30th, 1755, at night, come Fibber. 31st, Nancy, Fibber's sister, come here tonight, meaning she came over. She's here tonight. The 1st of February, about 2 p.m., come Fibber. At night, she slept in the cookroom. Sunday the 2nd, Fibber did not speak to me all day. Monday the 3rd, about midnight last night, I fetched Fibber from her house, had words with her again in the evening. At night, come Fibber. February 7th, Fibber denied me. Now, while Thistlewood and Fibber were having their temporary differences, Mrs. Anderson at Salt River was becoming more involved with William Mould. And as you can see, Fibber did not always willingly surrender to him. She often resisted him. Sunday, January 19th, 1755. At night, had a deal of private discourse with Mr. Cope about Miss Anderson and Mr. William Mould. He is well acquainted with the affair. The affair blossomed into matrimony. In early February 1755, one of Miss Anderson's slaves, Mason Quashie, hired to Egypt, was away helping to move his mistress's goods from Salt River to a house in Savannah. She had now forfeited her Doril inheritance. Greetings, Forecast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so glad you're here. Monday, January 17th, 1755, Here Miss Anderson at last night was married. Excuse me. Here Miss Anderson was last night married to Mr. William Mould, who was apprenticed to Mr. Durrell and served as a bookkeeper boy in the counting house. Excuse me. And was a blue coat boy. We'll learn what that is a little bit later. Just keep that in mind. A blue coat boy. I think this means he was of lower class. About 8 a.m. on that same day, when Mr. Cope heard the news of Miss Anderson's marriage, he immediately discharged all of her Negroes except Mason Quashie. Wednesday, January 22nd, 1755. Last night, Mr. William Crookshanks and Myrtilla at the Negroes' houses quarreled and made a prodigious noise and concern. William cut his own thumb with his machete. Thursday, February 13th, 1755. Myrtilla very ill. It is thought going to miscarry. William cries sadly, the more fool he, as it is probably for Salt River Long Qua. So he's talking about the fact that his friend William Crookshanks was upset about the fact that Myrtilla was going to miscarry a child that she was probably impregnated with by another enslaved person. But this white man was all broke up about it. Myrtilla belonged to Miss Anderson Mould, and a few days later she went off to Mrs. Mould's house in the savannah. Crookshanks visited her there every night. Sunday, February 23rd, Myrtilla is here. William says he has hired her for Mrs. Mould at 20 pounds per annum, sick in William's house. At the beginning of March, she had recovered and went to work in the field at Egypt. Mr. Cope would pay Crookshanks 2 bits per day for her hire. That would just about meet the 20 pounds per year if she worked regularly. In 1755 and 1756, ground provisions were scarce and dear, and Thistlewood noted the usual heavier incidents in such circumstances of slaves moving beyond their grounds to find subsistence. The vicious responses of their masters were also noted by Thistlewood, who in 1756 would calmly record his own disgraceful excesses. You know, it's a politeness to call them excesses. These were horrific, terrible punishments meted out by the people that decided they could own other people. Thursday, February 25th, 1755, at dinner time, rode over the plantation to see who would be eating canes, found Hector and Beck, had them whipped. Sunday, March 2nd, 1755, bought plantains for the new Negroes and house Negroes at 900 for 27 bits. The plantocracy, as distinct from their white employees, differed from the latter only in their greater possession of resources and authority, and therefore of responsibilities, which Mr. Cope, at any rate, seemed unable to bear. He was always in financial distress and frequently in other predicaments, often of his own making. Monday, March 17th, 1755. This morning, Mr. Cope took all of Mrs. Cope's china, glasses, and everything she bought here when he was last at town and smashed them all with all his force against the floor and broke them in pieces. believed they were given her by an old sweetheart, Thompson. Then he went out and stayed the night. Friday, April 11th, 1755. Our Negroes have this week but had but three plantains per diem, and none on holy days or Negro days, new Negroes. Sunday, April 13th, 1755, rode over the estate, the canes mostly destroyed by the cattle. Mr. Cope talks of renting it out and throwing it up. This was the height of the food scarcity, and in the dry weather, the cattle, even more than the slaves, were moving into the cane fields in search of sustenance. I find it odd that they dehumanized us, but when we acted like animals going out to search for food the way the animals did, because we were counted as animals, we were treated as animals, they didn't give us the same grace that they gave the animals. So there was this uniqueness of them knowing that we were human, but treating us like we weren't. Tuesday, April 15th, 1755, sent Port Royal with a mule and bags to Dr. Frazier's at Negril for corn. He got a bag full. Monday, May 19th, 1755, although Whitsun Monday, Mr. Cope made the Negroes work as a punishment, he says, for eating canes so much. Sunday, June 8th, 1755, in the morning rode into the savannah, into the Negro market, plantains 5 bits per 100, corn 4 ditto, bought none. William Crookshanks was with me. 3 days later, London was sent with 2 mules to Paradise to buy plantains. He got only a few, and the price there was the same. On the Sunday, Thistlewood tried the Negro market at Hatfield Gate. Again, he bought some at the same high prices. In the next few days, he noted, I give our new Negroes a pint of Norward from the American mainland. Corn each for a meal 3 times per day, a herring each day, qua, cubina, mall, mealia, and etc. have but 3 plantains or a pint of corn each per day. So he was rationing food because times were lean. On Sunday, the 22nd, at Hatfield, prices were down 1 bit per 100 on each item. But on the 29th, plantains were up to 5 again, and scarce. Not until the end of July did prices begin to decline. On the first Sunday in August, plantains were still at 4, but corn was being offered variously at 2 or 2.5 and 3 bits per 100. Thistlewood planted corn at Egypt. By this time, Mr. Cope had changed his mind and reemployed Mrs. Mould's slaves, but Mr. Mould still seemed to carry some resentment, and perhaps with some good reason, for John Cope seemed never to be in good financial standing. When in early April, Mr. Cope offered to pay him for the slaves' hire with an order upon Mr. Garinder in Savannah, Lamar, Mr. Mould refused to accept it. It might even have come to blows. Wednesday, April 23rd, 1755. Being St. George's Day, Mr. Cope dined out, and at night came home seemingly in liquor and bloody. His lips seem bruised, and he seems disheveled. William Crookshanks sent to Mr. Moulds to inquire. No more was recorded, but time apparently mended differences. Sunday, June 15th, 1755. Mr. Cope dined out. Mrs. Cope told me how much Mr. Cope wants her to cut off the entail and settle up on him for life. Or, as it is going to be a war, he must go home and try to make his fortune that way if she don't. Wednesday, August 13th, 1755. At night, Mr. Cope come home in liquor, wanted Sylvia very much, and was like a madman almost. So although he was married, he wanted Sylvia, the enslaved woman, and he was like a madman after her. Had my supper sent into my house to me. Monday, October 6th, 1755. Mr. Cope and Mr. Christopher Sr. went and took possession of Salt River and Paradise Estates last Saturday evening and have agreed to pay the debts off if possible before they make any dividend. Wednesday, October 15th, 1755. Myrtilla has been at home all week, ails little or nothing, only resolved to put William to a needless charge through spite. Sunday, December 28th, 1755. Mason Quashie had a feast here tonight. And in January 1756, Thistlewood recorded a striking coincidence, saying, "It is remarkable that one of the last new Negroes named Achilles is he who took Doll and sold her, and that having some clothes, some tobacco, dram, and a gun, was robbed going home of all he had acquired. And now, as a consequence of an increase in assault on the cane fields by slaves who were by his own account on very short rations, Thistlewood inflicted punishments which seem to have gone even beyond the accepted bestiality of the time. One of the chief consumers of young canes was Derby. Wednesday, January 28th, 1756, had Derby whipped and made Egypt shit in his mouth. Tuesday, February 24th, 1756, Myrtilla went away into the savannah. It seems her time is up. Here her neck is to be put in the yoke. She has worked 244 days in her year and earned William Crookshanks £5 15 At night, William Crookshanks abused Mr. and Mrs. Mould in an extraordinary manner in the savannah at their own house. Afterwards, crazed, went down on his knees and begged their pardons, and Myrtilla was the cause. Myrtilla was now pregnant, near childbirth. In mid-March, she was sent to Paradise, where Crookshanks went with her. Saturday, March 13th, 1756, Hazak catch Derby last night stealing cane, Derby wanting this morning. So Derby ran away. Because the last time they caught Derby, he was beaten and he shit in his mouth. He had Egypt shit in his mouth. Derby didn't want that to happen again. 2 days later, He was caught, escaped, and for a short while after recaptured and put in bilboes. For days, said Thistlewood, he remained sullen, not eating or drinking, and not seeming to care when he was whipped. Monday, March 15th, 1756. In the morning, W.C. went to Paradise, Myrtilla in labor all day. At night, Dr. Robinson sent to her, who delivered of her a girl, a mulatto, after supper. Mr. and Mrs. Mould also came over to see her and returned again in the night. W.C. came home and cried, "She is in Egypt Lucy's house at Paradise." On the 19th, Thistlewood went to visit Myrtilla and her daughter. About a week later, Crookshanks was transferred to Paradise. Myrtilla was to remain there, and Sancho would be sent to Egypt in her stead. At Paradise, William Crookshanks, according to Thistlewood, continued to pamper Myrtilla. On Monday, April 5th, 1756, the Moulds left Jamaica for England. For a while before their departure, they had stayed at Egypt. It was also crop over time. Mr. and Mrs. Mould went away into the savannah this morning, wrote a letter to Mr. Henry Hewitt by Mr. William Mould in the evening. Mr. and Mrs. Cope went into the savannah to take their leave. Mr. and Mrs. Cope went into the savannah to take their leave of Mr. and Mrs. Mould. Egypt now seems very dull. However, I had a bottle of good ale at my supper, which I mixed with sugar and water and grated some nutmeg over it. Roast beef, roast turkey, cold tongue, cheese, etc. to my supper. At night come Fibba. Sunday, May 2nd, 1756. Sometime in the middle of the night, Mr. Cope come home and Mr. MacDonald with him. They sat drinking for some time, then went to bed. Mr. MacDonald had Eve, to whom he gave 6 bits, and Mr. Cope made Tom fetch Beck from the Negro houses for himself, with whom she was till morning. Wednesday, May 5th, 1756. In the evening, Egypt Susanna and Mazarine whipped for refusal last Saturday night by Mr. Cope's order. Little Fibba told Mrs. Cope last Saturday night's affair. Mrs. Cope also examined the sheets and found them amiss. Mrs. Cope had been away on the Saturday night, spending a few days with Dr. and Mrs. Gorse. She had returned to Egypt in the morning on the 5th. On Wednesday, May the 26th, the Egypt slaves planted rice in the morass behind the mill house, but that, like much of the corn planted, would be eaten by the birds rather than by them, and Derby was again catched by Port Royal eating canes. Had him well flogged and pickled, he made Hector shit in his mouth. This sadistic and degrading punishment seemed to appeal to Thistlewood. In June 1756 came an interesting instance of an unusual domestic event. Nancy, Fibba's sister, was then a house slave at Egypt, and she had an infant son. Rose, an Egypt field slave who had been sent to Salt River at the end of February to be salivated for the bone ache now returned to Egypt and is to live with Nancy, who is to give Mr. Cope £5 per annual for her. Unfortunately, Thistlewood made no further comment on the arrangement by which one slave was hiring another from the owner of both, but the reason for it seems clear. Little Davy was ill. About noon on July 18th, he died. Saturday, July 24th, 1756, Nancy's play tonight. Sunday, July 24th, 1756, Nancy's play ended, much music and dancing all day long. In July, Port Royal, who had run away, was taken and brought home. So Port Royal, who had kept catching Derby, stealing food and eating food, had run away. I wonder what happened to make Port Royal run away. Gave him a moderate whipping, pickled him well, made Hector shit in his mouth. Immediately put a gag whilst his mouth was full and made him wear it 4 or 5 hours. So whereas with Derby, he was just making Hector shit in his mouth, which is repulsive. With Port Royal, who ran away, he made Hector shit in his mouth and put a gag over his mouth and made him wear it for 4 or 5 hours. That is utterly disgusting. That is utterly sickening. The next day, the 24th, a woman slave named Phyllis, caught breaking canes, was similarly treated but spared the gag. On the 31st, her punishment was repeated. The reason was not stated, but perhaps she had run away after the 24th, for on the 30th, 2 other runaways had been apprehended and punished. So Phyllis got that same punishment. So he was no respecter of person. He would do it to a man or to a woman. Friday, July 30th, 1756, Punch catched at Salt River and brought home, flogged him and Quaco well, and then washed and rubbed in salt pickle, lime juice, and bird pepper. Also whipped Hector, who had been shitting in people's mouths, for losing his hoe. Made New Negro Joe piss in his eyes and mouth. So he was disgustingly sadistic because now he had the new Negro Joe peeing in people's eyes and mouths. On the 1st of August, another runaway, Hazat, who had absconded in early April, was caught. Put him in the bilboes, both feet, gagged him, locked his hands together, rubbed them with molasses, and exposed him naked to the flies all day and to the mosquitoes all night without fire. On the 4th, Derby was caught again. By this time by the watchman, as he attempted to take corn out of Colonel Barclay's Long Pond corn piece. He was severely chopped with a machete, his right ear, cheek, and jaw almost cut off. On the 27th of the same month, Egypt was whipped and given Derby's dose. That is, Derby was made to shit in his mouth for eating cane. So Egypt, who had shat in Derby's mouth previously, had his mouth shat in by Derby. So there was this dynamic of, oh, you shat in my mouth for the master. Now I'm going to shit in your mouth for the master. So this is this animus of we can't get along because we have these other dynamics at play where we're frustrated with each other because he's the master, the overseer, is making us do things to each other. On Wednesday, the 5th of October, Hector and Joe and Mr. Watts Pomona were similarly punished for the same misdemeanor. Thereafter, for unmentioned reason, Mr. Thistlewood shed his depravity of 1756 and resorted to usual whippings and chainings. So, what was going on that they were so hungry, knowing that they would be punished? Because after after Egypt was forced to shit in Derby's mouth for stealing food, right? You would think that the other enslaved people in that area and in that situation would say, you know what, I don't want shit in my mouth, so I'm not gonna steal food. So how hungry were they? How much were they starving, right? For them to decide that if I don't eat something, I'm going to perish. So I'm gonna risk having somebody shit in my mouth if I get caught because I just need to eat. I just need to eat. The forecast says, who even thinks to do stuff like that? I don't know. Apparently, Thistlewood did. But 1756 was an especially interesting year in his life because that's the year that he did all of these depraved things. Late in 1756, the monthly musters of militia perfunctorily attended, were more regularly held, and additional guard duties instituted. Friday, September 10th, 1756. Being warned in the evening, rode to the bay, supped at Mr. Emmetson's. I watched in the fort till from 8 till 10 and from 4 till daylight. Mr. Stretcher, the pilot, with me, but 6 more and the sergeant besides. Saturday, December 4th, 1756. Martial law has now been some time. Rode down to the bay and entered upon guard at 8 o'clock. But it was all still very much like play. A body of the militia had a few days before been formed into a troop of dragoons created by Mr. Crawford, who was appointed as their colonel. The troop mounted today. At night, Colonel Witter, Mr. Cope, and company come to the fort, all drunk. Young Mr. Gooding, our officer, gave the guard 14 bits to spend at night. Carr, the wire dancer, our sergeant for the day. Friday, September 10th, 1756. Last night, Mr. Moulds Scotland was shot and cut with a machete until he died in Colonel Barclay's Negro ground by Old Jenny's by the watchman. He was stealing corn, plantains, and other victuals. This morning, Mr. George Cummings came to acquaint me, and I rode with him to the place where he lay dead. Did not meddle with him, came home and acquainted Mr. Cope. So again, how much were they starving these people that death was better than just eating what you had? That they were willing to risk life, humiliation, limb, to eat, just to eat, right? No more is mentioned of the Moulds themselves until late March of 1758, when William Mould returned from England. Came here, supped, and slept. Mrs. Mould did. He had a mulatto by her, and Phyllis Christian Peg. He subsequently went to live in Kingston. Saturday, September 25th, 1756. Many reports about Mr. William Crookshanks, particularly in regard to his humoring Myrtilla and about some rum sent to Mr. Mordiner to sell. Samuel Matthews was now sent back from Paradise to Egypt to replace Crookshanks. Saturday, September 26, 1756. That evening, Samuel Matthews come here as driver. They are weary of him at Paradise, so I spoke to Mr. Cope for him to come here. He lives where William lived. So at first, Samuel Matthews was supposed to be a co-overseer, but eventually they settled on him being a slave driver for some unknown reason. Matthews, while at Paradise, had hired Dido from Mr. Cope at £15 per year, commencing in mid-April 1756. At the beginning of October, she came to Egypt to live with him. For an unstated reason, she remained only 2 months. Tuesday, December 7th, 1756, Dido went to Paradise, and Samuel Matthews also went to deliver her up to the overseer. Mr. William Crookshanks sent me a piece of cheese by him. A week and a half later, another white employee was taken on at Egypt, Thomas Fuchs. His employment lasted only a few months, during which he was housed with Matthews. So Matthews must have been a white person, right? And they were afraid of having a white slave driver. Saturday, October 9th, 1756, Mr. C. Crookshanks, in his tantrums last night, forced Egypt Susanna in the cookroom, was like a madman most part of the night, and Mrs. Cope, very ill today. This evening, Dr. Gorse come to her and stayed all night. Sunday, November 7th, about 4 in the morning, set off in Mr. Mordiner's canoe to go a-shooting to the seaside with him. Stephen Vidal steered us. James Perrin, Davy, Sussex, and Lincoln rowed us. I shot a white curlew sitting on the mangrove. Mr. Mordiner shot a sort of blue golding. We also got 21 young crab catchers off the mangrove trees which grow out in the sea off Robbins Point, many conchs and other seafood. We went to the creek westward of the point, then returned toward the river mouth, went ashore, struck a fire, and made a fine breakfast of broiled herrings and plantains, which we brought with us, as also salt, pepper, sugar, rum, limes, and water. Broiled many young crab catchers, very fat and sweet. Broiled conch, buttered, and spices. During breakfast, we hooked a young shark. The bait was a crab catcher's guts. I laid on Mr. Morinder 4 bits that he was 2 foot 9 inches long, but he proved only 2 feet 8.5 inches, so I lost. Then we rode up to Mr. Mordiner's house at Salt River and dined there. About 4 p.m., set out for home again and got home before supper. Early in December, a domestic disturbance ended in death. Wednesday, December 8th, 1756. At dinner time, Mole, being jealous of Mr. Mold's Liddy with Cobenna, She beat Liddy so that we were forced to have her carried home. Maul afterwards went to Kobina's house, took out his clothes, and made to the riverside. That evening sent Kobinga and Dago to look for her. They could see nothing of her. Thursday, December 9th, in the morning, Sancho and the fishermen found Maul in the river, drowned willfully. We imagine she thought she had killed Liddy, hauled her upon dry land, and at night gave Kobina leave to bury her. Have been very much afraid of Kobina and Quimina's making away with themselves. They seem to be so much concerned by their looks and by their looks. But Thistlewood gives no explanation of his remark about Quimina, who seems not to have been involved in the unfortunate triangle. Christmas Day 1756 passed uneventfully. The Copes dined with Colonel Barclay. Thistlewood dined at Egypt sumptuously, and Myrtilla arrived at Egypt from Paradise with her daughter, Suki Crookshanks. Greetings, Sister Ra, and the elders listening with you. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're talking about Thomas Thistlewood and the punishments he meted out and the lives that he lived in the years 1755 to 1759. Sunday, December 26th, Myrtilla's Suki gave Myrtilla's Suki for a Christmas box 3 bits. In the morning, served our Negroes 6 herrings each. Drivers got 12 each. Children, some 2, some 3 each. In the morning, Mr. Crookshanks rode over here, gave him a glass tumbler. Then he prevailed with me to go to Paradise with him. Called at Mr. Mordiner's going. Dined at Paradise. Mr. William Madden, Mr. John Bell, Mr. Blanche, Mr. Samuel Mordiner, his wife Quashiba, and children also dined there. These were all of the Thistlewood and Mordiner's class. No large landed proprietor was there, and they even let an enslaved woman, because Quashiba was enslaved. In the evening, got home Samuel Matthews, the slave driver, at Paradise all day and night. His wife Dido, who was enslaved, whom he had hired at £15 a year, had recently, on December 7th, been recalled to work on Paradise. Thistlewood himself should have gone to do guard duty with the militia on the 26th, but ventured not to do so as we are going to keep guard upon Cabrito Bridge, where earlier in the month, 2 Egypt slave women going over the bridge at night found it almost covered with smuggled goods. Although the 7 Years' War had begun, it was not until the following year, in 1757, that Thistlewood notes began to display some apprehension. Mid-January 1757, Sam and Thomas parted their house, broke down a door at the end. Sunday, January 17th, 1757, Thomas Fuchs and little Liddy made up a match. Wednesday, January 19th, 1757, Thomas Fuchs says little Liddy has clapped him confoundedly. Friday, February 18th, 1757. Fuchs burnt little Liddy's coat, a continual noise all night in their room. Last night this happened. Since Dido's departure, Samuel Matthews has been unmatched. At the beginning of March 1757, he took Mrs. Mould's Frank, not to be confused with Fibba's close friend or relative, House Frank. Soon he would have, for a time, replaced Thistlewood as Egypt's overseer. February 1st, 1757. The chain and collars struck from Kwaku and Charles's neck, Kobina and Kamina being bound for Kwaku and Plato for Charles. This meaning is not absolutely clear, but it would seem that Kobina, Kamina, and Plato were standing surety. This remarkably was the first mention of any punishment in the year 1757, and there had been no record of any runaway. Perhaps he had been challenged by his conscience or by Fibba. Yeah, right. He didn't get challenged by his conscience. He was tired, exhausted, scared of insurrection. I'm sure they was talking around them corners about what they was going to do to him if he kept doing stuff to them. Wednesday, February 16th, 1757, heard great guns fired out at sea. But the crop taking had begun on the 7th, and for a few weeks it was that and other estate business which primarily occupied Thistlewood's attentions. Monday, February 7th, 1757, in the morning at turnout time, put the mill about, was also was to have put about at the rising of the morning star, but did not, though I strictly ordered Ambo to do so, for which gave him a good flogging. Also, one to his wife Agnes for her impudence. What was Agnes's impudence? Was she standing in the way of Ambo getting flogged, or was she doing something else? Tuesday, February 22nd, Paradise and Salt River not about. Can't make good sugar. Ours very good yet, thank God. Wednesday, February 28th, 23rd, new Negro Kwaku, seen in the morning, wanting all day. So Kwaku had run away. On Tuesday, March 1st, he delivered 2 large pots of sugar from the curing house, one for Dr. Gorst and one for Mrs. Wynne, and delivered 10 hogsheads of molasses out of the boiling house cistern to a party of sailors to be put on board ship. Saturday, April 2nd, Kobina catched London and Rosanna, who was Kobina's wife, at work upon London's bed. London got a good thumping, as I hear. This was after the coppers done cooling. So London was having sex with Rosanna, who was Kobina's wife, and Kobina beat him down. But already, ominous rumors of war and insurrection were spreading. Saturday, March 23rd, 1757, at night, Mr. Cope received a letter from Mr. Antrobus, suspecting the French intend to invade this island. By the men of war arrived at Hispaniola. The men of war is a type of ship. And there, having took the Greenwich man of war of 60 guns. Thursday, March 31st, 1757, reported Berman that murdered Pretty, his own child, Mrs. Dunbar, and some of Cujo's Negroes, at last killed by them. So there was a celebration of sorts that Bowman murdered Pretty, his own child, and Mrs. Dunbar and some of Cujo's Negroes, at last killed by them. So some of Cujo's Negroes, so some of the other Maroons were at last killed. They had a falling out, sounds like. Thursday, the 7th of April, 1757, some French prisoners went by, well guarded, towards Savannah Lamar, belonging to a French privateer in Little Bay this week. The capture brought its special rewards. On Sunday the 10th, Thistlewood had guests for dinner, had roast beef and plum pudding to dinner. As it is Easter Day, also mangrove oysters, good porter to drink, and very good claret wine bought out of the French prize at £5 per hogshead, or about 22 dozen bottles. A bottle of this claret now sold in the taverns at Savannah Lamar at 10 pence per bottle, and at other times £15 per bottle. It also served as a pre-crop over celebration, for on the 13th he noted, "Finished our crop this forenoon." But it had not been an outstanding one. They had made only 991 pots of sugar. The martial law instituted in late 1757 had apparently been relaxed, for on Wednesday, April 27th, 1757, he notes, martial law commenced the 19th instant in town and here today. Thursday, April 28th, 1757, Captain Kwaku and some of his attendants dined here. Friday, April 29th, a report that the French have dispossessed us of all we had on the coast of Guinea. Sunday, June 5th, 1757, about 8 at night, many, which was 10 or 12, great guns fired at the bay. But soon he was to be for a time removed from the sounds of guns and the guardhouse carousings at the fort in Savannah Lamar. The forecast says, we fight each other, but not the ones actually committing the crimes against us. We do fight each other and not the ones committing the crimes against us. And it's a shame that that is our mentality. I often say that they will use one of us to destroy all of us. And we have to get to the point where we are laser focused on who our enemy and adversary is, instead of being in a position where we're looking at the fact that I don't respect you as a person. And so because I don't respect you as a person, I have the right to tear you down, you know? Saturday, June 18th, 1757, in the morning, rode to Paul Island and agreed with Mr. John Parkinson, to whom Mr. Cope had addressed an extraordinary letter of reference, to live at Kendal, and to have 100 per annum the first year, and afterwards to have my wages raised, 4 barrels of beef, 1 of rum, 2 firkins of butter, a box of soap, and a box of candles, rum, sugarcane, plantains, and to raise fowls. returned Mr. Cope with his law books, which I have had a long time lent to me. So he was up there reading the law books, probably learning how to negotiate a better deal for himself. And he had written for him a letter of excellent recommendation. And in that letter of excellent recommendation, he negotiated that into a better paying job. Because if they were only paying 15 or 20 pounds, right, for an enslaved person, he was making 100 pounds for that same period of time. So he was making up to 5 times more, right, than the enslaved person was generating. With him, when his own personal slave, whom he had purchased from Mr. Mason at Hertford on January 3rd, 1756, for 43 pounds. As he had noted then, he is an Igbo, about 16 years of age, measures 4 foot 9 2/10 of an inch, named him Lincoln. Nowhere in his diaries does Thistlewood state explicitly why he made the move, but there are two possible explanations. In 1756, he had suffered another painful recurrence of venereal infection. He first mentioned notice of the symptoms at the beginning of September. At the end of the month, he was taking an electuary made up for him by Mulatto Will. He says it is rhubarb, cassia, and balm capivi, and some jolop scorched to make it mild over the fire. In early October, Kobina seeming to be cured, he took some of another mixture made up for Kobina by Dr. Gorse. That one contained jolop, rhubarb, gum guacum, balsam, capivi, and mercury. Neither seems to have brought complete cure, but if he hoped to elude further infection by removing himself from Egypt, he was to be disappointed. More likely, an explanation was his constant bickering with Mr. Cope over the terms of his employment. He might have felt that he was getting nowhere near to a fortune. There is some suggestion that he would have preferred the overseership at Salt River if he had been offered it at an increased wage, but Cope made no offer of that. On the 23rd of June, 1757, Thistlewood and Cope settled their accounts in a fashion. Cope owed him 92 pounds, 7 pence, and 9 shillings and 9 dittos. And there was still an outstanding 15 pounds, 2 shillings, and 7.5 dittos, due from his short stay with William Durrill at Salt River in 1752. Now he received an order on the Savannah Lamar merchant for 8 pounds, 9 shillings, and 9 dittos, was promised a puncheon of rum valued at 14 pounds, and was given Cope's promissory note for 70 pounds currency, payable with interest at some time future, unstated date. On the Salt River account, he was paid a little over 14 pounds. The next day he left after a hard parting from Thibba. Sunday, June 19th, 1757. Thibba grieves very much, and last night I could not sleep, but vastly uneasy. Wednesday, June 22nd, took up of Mr. Gurinder's in Savannah Lamar 10 yards of brown Ozenbrig, 20 bits, which Ozenberg delivered to Fibber for a certain use, gave Fibber 2 pistoles in money, a mosquito net, 3 cakes of soap, and 3.5 yards of cloth, outdoor lock, begging hard, begged hard of Mrs. Cope to sell or hire Fibber to me, but she won't. He was not willing. Gave 8 bits for little Qua, 4 to Damsel, 2 to Sylvia, 4 to Ambo, and 1 to Mazarine, 8 to Frankie, and 8 to Nancy. Mr. Cope dined and supped out, come home in the night and had little member. At night, come, Fibber. Fibber gave me a gold ring to keep for her sake. At night, come, Fibber. In the morning, parted with Fibber and set off for Kendall. Now was the testing time. His offer to hire or purchase Fibber indicates that he thought he wanted from with her, that he thought he wanted her with him, but he was now to be away from her for a prolonged period, and there were women to be had at Kendall, and it was not beyond possibility that he would find a new quote unquote wife there. On Saturday, June 25th, he sent Lincoln to Egypt with a letter from Mr. Cope. He was, he noted, mighty lonesome. Sunday, Lincoln came back to Thistlewood's trunk, and among the things, a fine land turtle Fibber sent me. At the following weekend, Lincoln was dispatched again, this time with some plantains. Shortly after his departure, Thistlewood began his Kendall amours. Friday, July 1st, 1757. About 7 p.m., come Fibber the cook. We slept in the bed in the north room. The next morning, Lincoln was back, and little Quashie with him. Frankie sent me 2 bottles of port wine. Fibber sent me some biscuit, cheese, bread, and 6 nascent nasa berries, and 7 fine mudfish. In the evening, Sam Matthews, who was now Egypt's overseer, come and rode on Mark Mule with Fibber with him, rode on Sam's mare. A good while after sunset, come vastly unexpected, was sent to persuade me back to Egypt. At night come Illa in the bed. Sam Matthews, we are told, lay in the south room bed, Sunday, July 3rd, about 10 a.m., Sam and little Quashie set out for Westmoreland. Gave Sam a little sugar in his handkerchief. He rode on his mare, lent Quashie a bag, and filled it with plantains, which he carried home on Mark's mule. Also gave Quashie 2 bits, so he perceives himself as being generous because he was at least giving his slaves something for their labor. In the morning, walked about and showed Sam and Fibber the garden, all the works. That evening, walked with Fibber to the Negro houses, plantain walk, and discussed about various affairs. At Egypt, the curing house has been broke open since I came away by Port Royal and Pedro. Nancy brought to bed of a girl about a week ago, had a very hard labor, the child dead. At night, come, Fibber. Monday the 4th, Monday, July 4th. Lent Pibble my horse to ride home on. She out before sunrise. Made Lincoln go with her. He carried some plantains in the basket and a few French beans for her to plant. Sent Mrs. Cope some roses. I wish they would sell her to me. She had Nancy's side saddles. Tonight, very lonely and melancholy again. No person sleep in the house but myself, and Fibba being gone this morning, still fresh in my mind. So he was longing for this enslaved woman, this woman who wasn't there by choice, but this woman that was there because she had to be there. Because she had to be there, not because she wanted to be there. Sunday, July 17th, 1757, in the morning, about 8 o'clock, little Quashi and Dover come from Egypt. Had a mule with them. Brought me a fine turtle and 18 crabs Fibba sent me. Quashi says she is sick, for which I am really very sorry. Poor girl, I pity her. She is in miserable slavery. On Saturday, the 23rd, Fibba came again, unexpectedly, and was joyfully received. She brought gifts, a letter from John Cope, and news. Plato and little Dover were with her. Monday morning, about 7 o'clock, she set out for home with foodstuffs and a letter to Mr. Cope. In it, Thistlewood said he would return to Egypt if Mr. Cope would pay him £100 per year, as he had at Kendal. Lincoln provided escort. He came on the Tuesday with more foodstuffs from Fibba for Thistlewood. So a good girl she is. I only sent 2 bits by her to lay out in fish. And so it went on every weekend. If Fibba did not come visit, Lincoln would be sent. And in any case, there was the exchange of gifts. On Wednesday, August the 3rd, Thistlewood himself paid a visit to Egypt. He set out from Kendal at about 7 o'clock in the morning, rode down to Storrs Barcadier, afterwards called at Dr. Roberts in Camp Savannah, drank some wine and water, right? Then rode on to Egypt. Got there just before Shell Below dined with Mr. Cope and Mr. Deeble there. Supped and stayed all night, slept in my own parlor, and at night, come, Fibba. Gave little Qua 2 bits. Mr. and Mrs. Cope very glad to see me. On Saturday the 13th, Fibba returned the visit. She arrived at Kendal escorted by Lincoln and accompanied by little Quashi and Egypt Susanna. She brought a basket full of goodies and, as usual, news. Abraham is turned in the field at Egypt. Poor Egypt Susanna, a frequent sex partner with Thistlewood, and at Egypt kept by Lincoln was neglected, and Egypt kept by Lincoln was neglected. Lincoln didn't seem to look good upon Egypt Susanna as she got Gordon's Polly here. August 26th, Friday. Sent Lincoln with my horse to Egypt for Fibba tomorrow. If she can come, he carried her some plantains and Mrs. Cope some roses. She came, and in the same way, she came again on Saturday, the 10th of September, on Saturday, the 23rd of September, on Saturday, the 8th of October, and on Friday, the 4th of November. In between, Thistlewood had once more visited Egypt on Monday, October 24th. On her previous visit to Kendall, Thibba had complained, and they had quarreled about Thistlewood's association with Aurelia, who seems to have been in La Femme Fatale of Kendall's slaves. But as usual, what happened? By the next day, they had made it up, and she and Thistlewood walked as far as the cave at the head of Green River Island, and so to bed. Then, once again, a new infection. Thibba's remonstrations notwithstanding, Thistlewood had gone again with Aurelia on Thursday, November the 10th, and on Saturday, November the 12th, another woman. Fanny had spent the night with him on Monday the 14th. Headache, feverish, feel oddly, a small running nose, and by the 17th, he was quite certain that he was once again in trouble. On the 18th, he sent Lincoln with his horse to Egypt, and on Saturday the 19th, Thibba arrived. As usual, she went back to Egypt on the Monday morning after. On Saturday, the 3rd of December, she returned to Kendall. On both those occasions, there was the usual exchange of news and gifts. Thibba must have been well aware of Thistlewood's condition, but there is no mention of complaint or quarrel. None is there any mention of sexual activity, nor is there any mention of sexual activity. On Saturday, December 10th, Thistlewood agreed to go back to Egypt to work for Mr. Cope and Mr. Durrell at the Hill Barcadier. On Tuesday, the 20th, he made the final gesture at Kendall. In the morning comes Sabrina, upright in the main house. A burning of the seed and cotton coition. On the Thursday, the 22nd, he visited Egypt to make final arrangements for his return. He slept there, and Thibba came to him. On Saturday, the 24th, 1757, he made the move, got to Thibba's house late at night, where I supped and slept. And as Mr. and Mrs. Cope had been gone to sleep, long been gone to sleep, there is no doubt that now we knew he needed her. On his return to Egypt, Mr. Cope offered Thistlewood half the profits of operating a new wharf near the mouth of the Cabarita. Provided I find 5 Negroes, attend myself, and give him the 100 per annum I should have from Dorwood, but I would not run the risk. This was a rather different proposition from one previously made. On December 10th, he had agreed with Cope and Dorwood, who were in partnership of the wharf, to live at Hill, to find 5 slaves to feed himself, but his slaves would be fed, to manage the business of the wharf, and to receive 200 pounds currency per year, of which apparently Cope would pay half and Durrell half. Now, Cope seemed to want to sell his share of the profits or losses to Thistlewood for a fixed 200 pounds a year. It was certainly not a tempting offer, and in fact, the venture did not prove successful. Thistlewood, however, set about preparing himself for eventuality. He stayed restlessly at Hill, and a house built there for them. On January 3rd, he rode to Savannah, Lamar, and among other purchases, acquired a silver mark with which he would make brand his belongings. He was offered an overseership by Mr. Dorwood at Mountain Spring at 120 pounds per year and salt provisions. He refused John Parkinson's proposed a joint venture. He refused. Mr. John Parkinson proposed a joint venture in tanning. Again, he refused. The next day, Tuesday, 1758, that evening, rode to the bay, brought of Mr. Samuel Lee an essay upon plantership by Samuel Martin, Sr., Esquire, third edition, written in Antigua, 1756, 5 bits. So that was a relatively new book of the day. And on the same day, bought of Mr. John Parkinson 2 new Negro men at 51 pounds each, and a new Negro girl at 46 pounds each. 148 pounds spent with Mr. Parkins, and these slaves would have no note or bond. February 27th, 1758 was a Monday. The 2 new Negroes in Egypt Field. One I have named Johnny lives with Mr. Samuel Matthews, the other named Simon with coffee, and the girl Abba in the cookroom. As the weeks passed, Thistlewood undertook the receiving and shipping of goods from the Hill Barcadier, continuing restlessness and sometimes denied visits by Fibber because of disagreements with the Copes. He was job hunting and performing in his usual various ways. Tuesday, March 7th, 1758, was exercised at Salt River by Adjutant McGuire. Exercise day, first Tuesday every month. Tuesday, 21st of March, write a memorandum how Mulatto Will's goods are to be disposed of at his death. His wife's shipmate Sylvia to have his cow, her daughter Hester, the heifer, Damsel, his wife, Jimmy J's wife, and Philly the rest of what he has. He desires to be buried at Salt River at his mother Dinah's right hand, and that no Negroes should sing. I wonder why he didn't want the Negroes to sing at his funeral. Mulatto Will must have known that his time was at hand. He died at Egypt on Easter Monday, March 27th, 1758, at about 2 p.m. Thistlewood does not record whether his last wishes were honored. At the end of March, he gave no answer when Mr. Cope, dissuading him from going to Honduras, made another offer of the overseership at Egypt. Wednesday, April 19th, 1758, at about 2 p.m., come in Abba in the bed, but it wasn't good. That was his first occasion with one of his own. On the following Sunday, Mr. Cope arrived with another offer at Egypt, with great promises which refused, and told him about his readiness to accept Cunningham at Salt River and Crookshanks at Paradise, and of his opposing me in many ways about the mosquito net, feeding Lincoln, giving Fibber no time. In May, he went the round of estates, but without success. Places had been filled or offers were unacceptable. Plagued by mosquitoes and jiggers or chigos, and with an itch which he claimed had been given him by Harry Weech, with whom he had shared his bed one night, he was vastly lonesome and disagreeable. So this itchy, stinky, unemployable, funky white man looking for a job, talking about he got it by sleeping and sharing a bed with Harry Weech. Yeah, right. Sunday, June 11th, 1758, rode to Mr. Mortimer's, dined there, read in The Humanist several entertaining things. This was the second volume. Stayed at Mr. Mortimer's till the evening, then rode home. Mr. Mortimer says, reported Mrs. Cocker has made free with one of Michigan's Negro fellows. Strange, if true, but scarce to be doubted. On Tuesday, June 27th, he agreed with Mr. Cope. He would go back to Egypt for £120 per annum, certain, and 20 shillings per household for all above 120. He is also to hire my Negroes. So finally, he was in a position to leverage what he had because he said, you're going to hire me, but you're also going to hire my Negroes. So he was making money off of his labor and the labor off of the enslaved. On the 30th, he moved, and on the 8th of July, the Copes moved out of Egypt and back to paradise. It is not improbable that that was part of the deal. Not that Mr. Thistlewood should occupy the great house, for he didn't, but that he should have no interference in his management of the estate. There is little room for doubt that Mr. Cope was glad to have Thistlewood back in charge at Egypt. Early in October of 1758, he writes, Mr. Cope told me to send to Hindman's of Saturdays for 6 bits worth of beef, and when crabs are good, to buy a bit's worth of a Sunday. And having thus expressed his appreciation, he departed, only to return at night in liquor after bedtime, slept here, and had Sylvia. He gave her a cob. On Sunday, the 19th of November, there was a great repeat performance. In the night, Mr. Cope and Mr. Stephen Cogpie come and stayed all night. Mr. Cope had Sylvia. Mr. Cogpie had Egypt Susanna and gave her 6 bits. She pissed the bed. I think that them pissing the bed was like a strategy of them, of resistance, of showing their disdain for the situation. Because remember, Jenny pissed the bed, Susanna pissed the bed. They are often pissing the bed based on what they have going on. The forecast says this whole thing is sick. No telling what he was doing with each other when they was stuck in Europe. Exactly. Ain't no telling what they did when they were stuck in Europe over there together with each other. And ain't no telling what they was doing on this plantation, on these plantations when they were there together, because, that there is evidence that says that there was a lot of homosexuality going on. And although Thistlewood clearly documents his encounters with women, he often references how a man spent the night and what this man did, and that this man was over all night long, Mr. Thistlewood was well and minutely informed, no doubt by Fibber, but, as we have also already learned, Fibber's great house duties and perhaps with good reason, sometimes led Thistlewood to conjecture. Saturday, the 2nd of December, 1758, Mr. Cope and Mr. John Dorwood dined here. Suspect Fibber, p.m. They went away. What does suspect Fibber mean? On the last day of the year, he recorded in detail an account of another kind of excessive behavior in which as a mere overseer, he could not yet himself indulge. Cost of an entertainment given His Excellency the Lieutenant Governor at the house of Savannah Lamar by gentlemen of the parish, furnished by Monsignors Hayes and Brooks. The event had occurred on the 2nd of July, 1757, and the Lieutenant Governor and his hosts had at their disposal 6 dozen claret at 15 shillings a bottle, 3 dozen old hock at £3 10 shillings a dozen, 3 dozen span, maybe Spanish, at 30 shillings a dozen, 1 dozen champagne at 17 shillings and 6 dittos a bottle, 4 dozen Madeira at 45 shillings a dozen, 8 dozen cider at 3 shillings a dozen, and dinner for all at £35. On the same day, December 31st, 1758, turning an entirely different subject of immediate importance to him, he listed the titles of 18 publications, some in several volumes, which he had received in a case by Mr. Hewitt in London. They included Religion, a poem from the French of the younger Racine, London, 1754. The second edition of the Court and City Register for 1757, corrected to January 19th, printed by J. Barnes. The Gardiner's Dictionary, abridged from the last folio edition, editor Philip Miller, London, 1754. Observations in Husbandry by Edward Lyle, Esquire, London, 1757. Select essays on commerce, agriculture, mines, fisheries, and other things, translated from the Journal Oceanomique, Paris, London, 1754. Horse Hoeing, Husbandry, or an Essay on the Principles of Vegetation and Tillage by Jethro Tull, Esquire, of Shelbourne in Berkshire, London, 1751. And he had been lent by Mr. Cope 2 Caribbean works, a treatise on husbandry or planting by William Belgrave, a regular bred and experienced planter of the island of Barbados, printed at Boston in New England, 1755, 4 volumes as bound, and Instructions for Management of Draxhall and Irish Hope Plantations to Archibald Johnson by Henry Dax, Esquire. The latter was about 15 pages missing. From both of these, he made copious notes. On Saturday, the 20th of January, 1759, there was another festivity in which he could not share, a ball at Paradise, hosted by Fibber's sister, Nancy, but the occasion was not explained. At night, lent Fibber my horse to Paradise to Nancy's ball. Then, betimes on Sunday morning, Fibber returned, bringing him a bottle of wine. During her absence, he risked getting a wedding, Egypt, Susanna, on the ground outside, gave her 2 bits, but on Sunday night he made it up. Come, Fibber. On Egypt, preparations were in hand for the 1759 crop, and on the 12th of February, he put the mill about. A few weeks later, a white employed at Paradise was murdered. Suspicion fell on Salt River Duke, who ran away. Then, on the night of Friday, March 30th, Paradise Great House was broken into. No damage was recorded, but here suspicion fell on Prince, a Paradise slave. The Copeses decided to move. The next day, Sunday, April 1st, they went to Egypt and remained there until the last week of April. Monday, April 2nd, saw a large comet this morning to the eastward. The next morning, he saw it again. Sunday, the 8th of April, last night, Salt River Duke at Old Sarah's gate, seen by Old Sarah and Pero. He had a machete in his hand and inquired if any Salt River Negroes were this way. He drank some of Pero's cane liquor he had in calabash, went towards Top Hill. Thistlewood made no mention of any attempt to capture Duke for the time being. Things had been quieted down. Monday, the 9th of April, my Johnny wanting, in the evening returned very loose with yaws. Observed the comet, whose tail rather increased, I think. It rises about 2 hours before the sun. Its course is retrograde. It moves southward to the southward. Began to give Simon a diet drink again of lignum vitae, sarsaparilla, and senna, because I shall lose him. He is so meager and distempered. Friday, April 27th, observed the comet about 8 minutes in the evening to the south, about 25 degrees high, with a bushy tail and heading eastward. Monday, April 30th, the comet resplendent tonight, making its way to the westward of the north, somewhat about 50 degrees high in the south before 8 p.m. Tail about 20 degrees. Tuesday, May 15th, about 8 p.m., saw the comet again in the southwest, about 60 degrees high, but faint. This evening, some clouds in the west of a greenish color. And he recorded it twice again on Wednesday the 16th and for the last time on the 22nd. Saw the comet at night, very faint. In mid-May, after the Copeses had returned to Paradise, little Member was brought out of the field and put to sewing in Egypt's great house. Saturday, May 19th, at night, Mr. Cope came, slept here, and had little Member, but suspect he has the clap or gonorrhea. Nonetheless, and indeed, he had little reason to worry whether or not 5 nights later. In the evening, come, little Member, a Creole. We had sex in the parlor of the house. Indulging other interests, he also had been discussing some of the books going the rounds among the planters. Lent Mr. Parkson The Oceanomy of Love, a poem said to be wrote by Armstrong, a Scotsman. Mr. Parkinson praises Tom Jones, said to be wrote by Fielding, Joseph Andrews, by Fielding's sister, Harvey's Meditations. Roderick Random and Peregrine Pickle by Smollett, not quite so good, though praised by the Scotch. Maryland said to be wrote by Chesterfield. On the 21st of June, the Cope's daughter Polly was christened at Paradise. Fibba went over to help cook dinner. It was a busy afternoon for Thistlewood. About 1 p.m., the canoe came, received by her 2 firkins of butter from Myler's Wharf, a small barrel of herrings, and half a barrel of beef. Also received an old grindstone about 22 inches and a half dram from Mr. Wheatley. Received a note from Mr. Stokes, a hog from Mr. Joseph Williams, Esquire. Wrote to him. They also bought Abba in the canoe, flogged her as well. There's no reason to have flogged Abba. Has she run away? Having thus attended to her, he turned to others. Come, Mazarine, on the ground near the curing house. Cane piece gave her a bit. Come, Warsaw, in the boiling house, standing up backwards. Later, he settled down to have supper sent to him from Paradise by Fibba, who returned the next day bearing gifts from the Copes: a leg of mutton, cheesecake, and pine tarts. There is no indication that she was told of his capers during her absence, but she soon caused him a good deal of anxiety, which he apparently attempted to hide behind an unconvincing display of indifference. In the evening of Friday, August the 3rd, Mr. Cope, Stephen Cogpie, and his brother Tom Cogpie arrived. Mr. Cope had Member. The other two had Rosanna and Marzarine. I reprimanded Fibba for going in the house. Sunday the 12th, come, little Liddy, on the ground in the cane field, gave her a bit. Wednesday the 15th, Fibba last night at the Negro House, 2 p.m. Mr. Parkinson called to see me, told me he saw Mr. Peter Colgrave in town, who inquired much after me. Fibba sleeps in the great house. I take it. Thursday, the 16th, Fibba yet away. Friday, the 17th, at night, come, Mountains Susanna, in the bed, gave her 2 bits. Fibba, I don't know where, at the Negro house, in the cook room, or great house. And I think she's with Dago. Fibba, yet away, received 6 pounds of beef from Mr. Hindman. Gave our Negroes today. That evening, rode to the bay, drank tea with Miss Emmetson in the evening, rode home. In the evening, but after I was gone to bed, Mr. Cope come, had Member or Venus. Fibba in the great house also. What about, I can't tell. Put Betty and Clara in steep for the crab yaws. Fibba sleeps yet in the cook room or great house. Dago also. Wednesday, the 22nd, that morning, come Violet on the ground, and a cane piece gave her a bit. Thursday, the 23rd, in the night, Mr. Cope come, Fibba I don't know where. Friday, the 24th, that morning, Mrs. Cope, Polly Cope, and company come to stay here for a while. And perhaps, in consequence, he enjoyed a Sunday dinner of roasted bullock's tongue. Very good. For the next day or two, there was no mention either of Fibba or of his interference with any other than on the 27th, Wednesday, come Moldsletty in the curing house, standing up backwards, made Fibba run for her impudence. Next day took Daphne a Congo on the ground, and on the 31st he noted Fibber yet away, very saucy and impudent, and so until Tuesday, the 4th of September, in the evening, come Egypt Susanna in the bed, gave her 2 bits, sent word by her to Fibber she might come if she would, and accordingly she did. At night, come Fibber. So he had sex with 2 women in one day, and after having sex with Egypt Susanna, he told her to go get Fibber, and Fibber came. Towards the end of the year, Mr. Peter Colgrave came and dined with the Thistlewood at Egypt, and they discussed the difficulties of overseership. Mr. Colgrave remarked that the 3 essential qualifications of an overseer are lenity, industry, and honesty, supposing him to have common sense also. That the warm sun and blue skies in this country are all that is agreeable. The conversation must have been interesting. Thistlewood was in no doubt of his own excellence and never hesitant to record the failings and merits where he saw them. Of others who supervised the work of slaves on the neighboring Long Pond estate, Mr. Reed, formerly at Salt River, had recently been employed by Colonel Barclay in the place of Mr. Cummings, who had been too easy with the Negroes. On Egypt, there had been and would continue a rapid turnover of white drivers or bookkeepers, as we refer to them, but Thistlewood seldom used that term. At the end of July 1759, for instance, Thomas Beard, who was apparently too lenient, had been replaced by Robert Lawrence. In early 1760, Lawrence was replaced by John Groves, of whom more anon. Thistlewood himself was never really happy working in someone else's employ. He had successively quarreled with Florentius Vassall, William Durrill, and John Cope, of whom he seemed to have the least opinion. In mid-September, he addressed himself to Mr. Vassall. Egypt Plantation, Savannah Lamar, Westmoreland, Jamaica, September 13th, 1759. To Florentius Vassall. Sir, I have lately been informed that it is imagined you are not yet provided with a person in Mr. John Brown's place, altogether to your liking. If not, and that you think me a proper person, I should be glad to serve you, which I am in hopes I should be to your satisfaction. The place I am in with Mr. Cope is as good as £100 sterling per annum. All necessities found me with no expenses, which is indeed as much as it can afford. Therefore, shall not leave it except something offers very considerably to my advantage, as I imagine your employ would be, where I should also hope to be fixed for many years, having a great dislike for often changing, which must be very disadvantageous to the owners of estates. As I have observed, it is not uncommon in these parts for a man to leave his place by the time he is acquainted with his business. I am, sir, your most humble servant, Thomas Thistlewood. So he was begging for a job. This was not simply a shot in the dark. In conversations with others a few days previously, Thistlewood had been told that Mr. Vassall would like to have him, though others were trying to persuade him otherwise. In any case, Mr. Vassal's reply was not recorded. There were a few remarkable events in the next 2 months, except Fibba's announcement on Monday, October 22nd, that she suspects she is breeding. In the same week, Thursday, Fibba behaved oddly tonight, conscious of guilt in the great house with JC this afternoon. Since incidents of late March and early April, there have been occasional rumors of restlessness among the slaves of one of the estates or another, but there had been no great alarm. Such apprehensions as there had been were of a more personal and domestic nature, and had alarmed the planters rather than the slaves. But the year ended with two events of a kind not previously recorded. One morning, at the end of September, some of the Egypt slaves had chased some runaways from off an island in the morass. Among those chased was Egypt's Cambridge, and in the afternoon he had been found by himself in Dunbar ground, brought home by Jackie, Cambridge, had been well flogged and secured in the bilboes. Later in that year, Thistlewood notes, on December 2nd, 1759, about 1 p.m., little Quashie come and told me that Cambridge was found dead in the morass back of the cotton tree where we cut copper wood last year, in the water, by Daniel and Jackie. The cattle boys say they heard him holler last night, but thought it was but thought it had been canoemen in the river. Imagine he was murdered by runaways who, it seems, threatened to murder him the last time he was run away if he did not leave them, lest they should be found upon his account by looking for him, wrote an account of Mr. Cope to Per Prince. So it's rumored, it's thought that the runaway slaves killed him. Greetings, Moana Haguziki. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. So it's thought that the runaway slaves killed him, little Kwashi, because he kept running away and he did not leave them alone. The next morning, Thistlewood went to Savannah, Lamar, and reported the death to Mr. Theodore Stone, the coroner. Then he returned to Egypt. Only then did they fetch Cambridge's body out of the morass and examine it. No mark of violence was discernible, but the examination was rapid and perhaps perfunctory because the state of the corpse. Nonetheless, I and the Negroes think he was forcibly drowned by runaways. Again, Thistlewood reported to Mr. Cope and to Mr. Stone, on the authority of the coroner, Cambridge was buried. Exactly a week later, another runaway, Moulds Hazat, came home, this time alive and voluntarily. Hazat had been run away for some time. Once on December 1st, he was spotted by other Egypt slaves working at heel, but he had not been taken. On Sunday, the 9th of December, 1759, received a letter from Mr. Henry Weech, the Paradise Overseer, per Mason Quashie, with whom comes Moulds Hazat. Come home of his own accord. He says he was afraid of being murdered in the woods, has been shot at 3 times since he has been out. So we know this was before Harriet Tubman. But we know that there's this idea among the enslaved that if you run away, you either with us or you against us. And that vacillating back and forth between I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna stay, I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna stay, doesn't really work well for us because you put all of us at risk, right? And in this environment, there are maroons that are hunting you down. There are white people that are hunting you down. So you put all of us at risk with your indecisiveness. You put all of us at risk with your indecisiveness. All right, so there is a reference to a blue coat. Remember earlier in the story where the woman married down? So she was marrying a blue coated soldier, which was a lower class soldier. They refused to go to Cope and MacDonald, who had then summoned Eve and Beck. The beginning of the wake, which continued through Sunday. The doctor was a slave doctor at Salt River. This was Thistlewood's son, born by Nango Jenny, that was the mulatto child. He would later be referred to as Little Thomas. He died in childhood. Jimmy Hayes, whose color is unknown, was a tavern keeper in Savannah Lamar. Mulatto Will was a slave. Damsel clearly had been one and perhaps still was. Perhaps she had originally been with Jimmy Hayes, either as his property or simply as his wife, though belonging to someone else. If Hester was Damsel's daughter, she was not to have been Mulatto Will's. Perhaps she was Jimmy Hayes's. And Haley's Comet on its first predicted return, it had first been sighted elsewhere in December of 1758. So that anomaly in the sky that Thomas Thistlewood kept talking about him seeing was Haley's Comet, and he saw it several times over the course of several days. But as you can see, life on the plantation was crazy. So Derby had Derby was beat for stealing food, and Derby was then beaten. And then after he was beaten, he had his mouth open and Egypt shat in his mouth, right? And then they had his mouth shut for 4 or 5 hours. And Derby, even after that, kept stealing food. It is my thing that they were starving the slaves because times were scarce. Times were scarce. Times were scarce. It's crazy that they were doing that, but I think that times were scarce and that they were I think that they were stealing food because they were hungry. Because there's no way that all of these different enslaved people are going to go about stealing food knowing that they could possibly have their mouths shit in or have their face pissed on, and they willingly take the risk of that happening. So I think that because resources were scarce and that they were in a position where they only wanted to engorge themselves, they only wanted to feed themselves, I think that they were not feeding the slaves as well as they should have fed the slaves. Now, I said this at the beginning, but I'll say it now. Bwana Haguziki asked me a question last week about why were so many plantations, why did they call the plantation Egypt? And off the cuff, because I don't really think that these people are the most intelligent people on the planet, I said because Egypt is all they knew. when that's not 100% true. What's actually true is that Egypt is the land of abundance and plenty, and they often name the plantations with ideas of wanting to have that type of abundance and plentifulness, that special soil, that abundant soil, that fertile soil. And they name places based on that. That's why you'll find a plantation named Paradise, you'll find a plantation named Egypt, you find plantations with names that are epic, right? Greetings, Bawana Haguziki. How are you this evening?
I'm good, Mitch. And how are you this evening?
I'm good.
Awesome, awesome. Briefly, since I only catch the last part of your reading, I'll probably have to listen to the playback.
Hmm.
But something that you said resonated with me. You said that the enslaved Africans would kill, well, will unalive. That's the
Hmm.
word we have to use on the internet now. Would unalive the slaves who were indecisive.
Hmm.
Either you are in or you are out. Make a decision. I think that we could learn from that experience. Make a decision. Either you are in or you are out. Either you can't, especially when it comes to dealing with life and death situations. Either you are in with us or you are not with us at all. There is no middle ground, and I think that is an important takeaway from that reading.
Page
Also,
133. Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that I think that indecision is where we perish, because when we fall into indecision, we set ourselves up to be set up. We set ourselves up to be unalive. We set ourselves up to be prey. We set ourselves up to be, taken advantage of. We're not covered, because if you're with us, then we all have agreed that this thing is going to end in liberty or death. If you're not with us, we don't have to worry about you. But at the point that you vacillate, you become a threat to all of us.
yes, sir, vacillation is extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. Also, another thing that you mentioned is theft, the theft of food. Poverty sometimes leads to corruption. Now, I understand that the Western world likes to place this idea of corruption on black people, you
Hmm.
know, but consider these are black people. They used to talk about Africa where you could leave a pencil or you could leave all your goods anywhere and come back and find it. Now they find themselves in a situation where they're denied the ability to eat. These things leads to corruptive kind of forces entering into the minds of people where they wouldn't even have considered it before. Whether
Hmm.
you don't want to consider it before. Now, fast forward that 400 years later, this has become a culture because sometimes poverty, sometimes when you stress the human being and deny the human being, on his of his natural right to do to eat, to eat,
Hmm.
it's going to
Hmm.
lead to certain things. So I think that that's important that you would have mentioned that, because where these Africans probably would have never had the idea to steal food, now they have to steal food because the slave, and you say purposely and intentionally, I don't know whether that's true or not, but now when you are being starved, it's going to lead to corruption coming in. You're going to do things that you wouldn't ordinarily have done.
Absolutely, you're going to do things you wouldn't ordinarily have done. They came from an environment where food was the least of their worries. It grew on the trees, it came out of the ground, it was there in abundance available for them to consume. And then for them to be in an environment where they see something to eat and they don't have the right to go and eat because they're hungry. Now, when I say on purpose, I just mean that the white people we had food and they were eating. They just weren't buying the enslaved people food, because there were many times in the text where he said, "Oh no, this costs too much. I'm not buying no plantain and cane for them today. I'm not buying corn for them today because it costs too much." But he often reports of having like roast beef and things of that nature for himself. So the logic there in my opinion, is that he was eating the best of meals and he was refusing to spend his money to feed the enslaved population that he was responsible for. And
And
they,
you know, sorry for interrupting. Sorry for interrupting.
that's okay. Go ahead.
What's interesting about that is this is where the African ingenuity kicked in, because now you they used to use this term living high on the hog, and
Hmm.
giving the Africans the offal. That's the word they used to, offal,
Hmm.
the intestines,
Hmm.
if you will, the what you call it, oxtail. this
Oxtail.
this is the
Hmm.
reason. This is the where the African ingenuity kicked in, because they had to find an alternative means of eating.
Hmm.
And now the oxtail, what used to be the throwaway portions of the foods that the slaves used to eat, now it's considered a delicacy. Now oxtail is what, $28 a plate.
Yeah.
Now the same white folks who used to throw it away, they pay $28 a plate, 2026, to eat the offal, what the slaves had to eat. Isn't that interesting? Needless to say, I can't wait for the next reading, because you're gonna talk about Taki and
Hmm.
reference to the Taki's rebellion. So that's gonna
Hmm.
be an interesting read next week, or whenever you decide to come back.
I'll be back on Thursday. So it'll be Thursday. Are you available Thursday?
If when I come from work, sometimes it's late, so
Hmm.
I'll be around. I'll try to get back in time, but
Hmm.
I'm it's gonna be interesting read. If I'm not here in time, if I catch the last part of it, I'll just listen to the playback. No worries.
Oh, no worries. I appreciate you for, like I said, making the suggestion of this book and participating the way that you do. I value that because these are the conversations that we need to have. Like, what did you take away from this? Or what was your opinion of that? Because I can give you my opinion. And since I think these are despicable Neanderthals that have homoerotic fixations with each other and Black people, um, just based on some other readings I've done, I think that he was sleeping around with the men. I think he was sleeping with the women. I think he was sleeping with the children sometimes. I think that they were sleeping with other white men and with the Black enslaved men. I think that there were different power dynamics happening on this plantation in this environment, and that he was documenting his experiences with the women, but he was also implying he had these other experiences with other people in the household that's not really explored. This author did not really explore that. Oh, this gentleman spent the night after dinner. Well, what did they do after dinner? And he clearly documents when they slept with an enslaved woman after dinner, and when they, and he clearly documents when men were sharing housing, whether they were overseers or drivers or enslaved people. But when he has overnight mail company, he just says, "Oh, he spent the night." You know,
Yeah,
so
it's very interesting. It's very interesting how they tell the history, because it's very interesting. Remember now, matron, these are so-called Christians now, so they
Mhm,
can't really confess to the real devilishment, well, what they consider to be devilishment in the things which they would have done, because for the longest period of time in England, boogery, or what they sodomy, was
mhm,
against the law. So, I'm sure, because right now it's wholesale. I mean, England is almost a LGBT enclave.
mhm,
So what they would have been doing back in the day, they probably wouldn't have wrote it down. But I'm sure they were sleeping with men, they were sleeping with boys, they were sleeping with sheep, because a lot of that took place with the farmers and sheep herders in UK as well. So I find it interesting that that's missing in terms of the history and the dialogue when they tell the tales of what they would have done in coming to the Caribbean islands and the Americas. That's really missing. And it's not to say that it didn't happen, because I'm sure it did.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And we have to reconcile that history with who we are to them to understand better what they were actually doing to us, because they put it in these gentle terms, and they call Fibba his wife. They call these enslaved women that were forced into these sexual relationships with these men their wives, when that's not what a wife is. They call these relationships that they have with other people polite affections. They say these things and they put them in polite terms, and it's like, no, that's not what was happening. Yeah, the most graphic thing he said was when he talked about shutting the man's mouth with, making another enslaved person shit in his mouth, and shutting his mouth for 4 or 5 hours, or making an enslaved person piss in his mouth, and then, shutting their mouths. That's as graphic as it gets. But he didn't really see anything wrong with doing those things, because he just documented what he was doing. He just, as punishment, because these punishments didn't count as depraved behaviors and actions. These were just the punishments that they deserved because they kept stealing the food. These were just the punishments.
It is strange that really, when you mention things like that, I have to ask myself, who thinks about shit like that?
Yeah.
Who would think, well, you know what? Let me shit in the person's. But you know what, though, matron, there was a guy. His name was John McCaffrey.
Hmm.
If you go on the internet right now and you see like security apps and security installations, and you
Oh,
could mention
McAfee. Yeah. Yeah.
McAfee, right? That same guy right there. He came to the Caribbean, by the way. I think he was a UK person or one of these people. And he used to date exclusively black women. And some of the black women used to mention some of the sexual acts that he would used to like. What it was, they used to like him, they used to like them. Well, he used to like them to shit in his mouth as a
Mm.
sexual act. So it all makes sense. It makes
Hmm.
sense. It
Yep.
makes sense. It comes from somewhere because it's like, who African person documented as a form of punishment, a human was to crotch over and shit in a black person. It's not written in African history. It has to
No.
come from somewhere. So it all connects. When you see this guy is doing the same kind of behavior that Thistlewood used to do in the 17th in the 18th century. It's very interesting.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And they tell on themselves. Do you know what I'm saying? Because, like, I believe Thistlewood did get some type. I think he was a voyeur as well, because I believe he got some type of gratification, because a man with the type of sexual appetite that he had, and the high-minded thoughts he had of himself, the way that he viewed himself as better than many of the other overseers in the area, the way that the way that he idealized himself as being better to his enslaved population than the others were to their enslaved population. He you can see who he is in today. Like you said, you found a direct correlation, John McAfee, right there, as to who he is. A white boy that thinks highly of himself, that treats these women probably really well. He probably pays them really well for this service because he has money and he doesn't know what to do with it, but he's getting off by having them shit in his mouth, you know? And I think that Thistlewood enjoyed watching these depraved acts as well. And he was mentally stimulated by some of the punishments that he meted out, because they don't list out every instance of all of the different punishments that he did. And the author says that clearly. But I think that he had some level of sexual arousal when it came to meting out these punishments and lording over these people in this way, because it's about power and control, and I own you and you're gonna do what I say do. That's why Fibba frustrated him so much.
Well, at least she still had the energy to fight.
Hmm.
I what I am glad of is in 2026. I'm a big advocate of the Epstein files.
Mm-hmm.
because Epstein, because Thistlewood was Epstein before Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
All these so-called people that black, colored people, black people, non-white people drool in the mouth to want to be like. This is basically putting up a big mirror and broadcasting to the world. These are your leaders. These are the people
Yes.
you aspire to be. So now the black man, because I deal in the black man business, has to second guess and say, well, maybe I shouldn't go that way. Maybe I should find my own course in this world because I don't want to be that. That's nothing to
Yes.
aspire to. So I'm glad about the Epstein files. But like I say, this reading is just the Epstein files before the Epstein files.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree. And I absolutely agree that these are the things that are in their history that tell us they're capable of this. So like we'll hear things and we'll be like, "Oh, they didn't do that. They wouldn't have done that." And all of these different things, but when you recognize that they were eating babies before, they were sodomizing women and they were sodomizing men before, they were molesting and accosting women before, they were, these things are all in their history. So once you realize that these things are all in their history, this is just the natural outgrowth of them knowing who they are and acting on the different aspects of their history.
And also, I would just add to that, they were doing it in the name of Jesus, because most of these people, this is uncomfortable for some people, but these people were born again Christians, civilized and savages. So I
Mhm.
don't want to take out that element in the things and what they were doing. But like I say, um, matron, you certainly are the revolutionary matron. I don't care if your numbers is 10 and 5. I think that the readings you are doing is invaluable, invaluable. Maybe if the people don't want to eat it now, the people who search in terms of information will value you later. But I can value you now, and I
I
think that
appreciate
what you are
that.
doing is absolutely valuable, absolutely valuable. I think you should have 100,000 subscribers. But like I say, for my I don't know what books you have next to read, but well, I'll get with you later on that. I'll email you, because I'll have to pay for that one. But needless to say, I appreciate you, sister, and thank you for the reading. I'll listen to the playback, and we'll go forward from there.
I appreciate you too, Bwana Hagaziki, and thank you. Sister Raw in the chat says, them caucasoids had no plan for what we were going to eat, our shelter, our covering. They only planned for work and for us to die. And we have to understand that. And then the forecast says, they claim their ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago, they were cutting each other up, eating each other. Exactly. They were cutting each other up and eating each other. We're going to get to the delectable Negro in our readings. And when we get to that book, we're going to learn more about their homosexual fetishization of the black man and their consumption behaviors. Um, there's also this book that is called, give me one moment, that is called The Religious Teaching Religion to the, hold on, it's called The Religion Instruction of the Negroes in the United States. And we're not going to go through that whole book, but we're going to go through some highlighted aspects of that book because they talk about our family dynamic and our government structures that we had and how they introduce these ideas into our consciousness and make us docile when we study Christianity. So we have to be aware of what's actually going on. There's nothing wrong with having a spiritual system. Every person needs one, because if you don't, you're not grounded to anything. But there is something distinctively wrong with the organized religions that they have taught us because of how they have taught us to practice those religions. Those religions don't make us radical the way that they should, they make us docile and take away our ability and desire to fight. Anyway, I will be back on Thursday and we're going to read chapter 5, which is going to talk about the Taki Rebellion. I want to thank Bwana Haguziki, Sister Raw, and the elders listening with her, and the Forecast Radio for being here. I know that Anthony McPhail is listening. I know that KW Don 7 is listening. I know that Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast is listening, and so many others. And you. Yes, you. I appreciate each and every one of you for being here. I want to thank you, and I will talk to you on Thursday. Peace, guys.